Dr. Ethan Carter had always been a man of precision. He thrived in the sterile, controlled environment of the operating room, where every movement had purpose, every second mattered, and emotions had no place. He had spent years perfecting the art of detachment, believing that caring too much made it harder to do the job. Patients came and went, some survived, some didn't, but feelings couldn't cloud his judgment. Then, Amelia Brooks arrived. Amelia was unlike anyone Ethan had ever met. As a nurse in the emergency department, she thrived in chaos, moving through the unpredictability of each case with a kind of grace that fascinated him. Where he was sharp and direct, she was warm and understanding. While he focused on fixing bodies, she focused on healing hearts. Patients adored her, colleagues leaned on her, and Ethan, well, he didn't quite know what to do with her. Their first encounter had been purely professional, an urgent trauma case, a patient on the brink of death. Ethan had given orders with his usual brisk efficiency, expecting the nurses to follow without question. But Amelia had held her ground, challenging a decision he made. "Doctor, his pressure's crashing. We need to adjust the fluid rate before we lose him," she said, her voice calm but firm. Ethan had been ready to brush off her concern. He was the surgeon, after all, but something in her eyes made him pause. He reconsidered, adjusted the treatment plan, and minutes later, the patient stabilized. Afterward, he had approached her. "You were right," he admitted. She had simply smiled. "I usually am." That moment stayed with him. And over time, Amelia became impossible to ignore. At first, their interactions were brief, quick exchanges during shifts, passing nods in hallways. But then came the late nights, the stolen moments of shared exhaustion, the quiet conversations over lukewarm coffee in the break room. "You never stop, do you?" she mused one night as she found him reviewing patient charts long after his shift had ended. He smirked. "Neither do you." She shrugged. "Someone has to remind you to eat." It became a habit, her slipping a granola bar onto his desk when she thought he wasn't looking, him refilling her coffee before she realized it was empty. Their connection was unspoken at first, a growing awareness of each other in a way that neither of them fully acknowledged. Then, one evening, everything changed. A mass casualty incident had flooded the hospital with patients, pushing the staff to their limits. Ethan had spent hours in surgery, his hands aching, his mind exhausted. When he finally stepped out of the operating room, he found Amelia sitting on the floor of the supply closet, her head resting against the shelves. Without a word, he sat down beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the night hung between them, pressing down like an invisible force. Finally, Amelia let out a breath. "Sometimes, I wonder if we're just patching up people so they can go out and get hurt again." Ethan had never been good at comfort, but something about the vulnerability in her voice made him reach for her hand. "Sometimes, we are. But sometimes, we save them. And that has to be enough." She turned her head toward him, studying his face as if she were seeing him for the first time. Then, slowly, she leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek before standing. "Get some rest, drive. Carter." That was the moment he knew he was falling for her. The transition from colleagues to something more was slow, tentative. They stole moments when they could, a brush of hands while passing a scalpel, whispered words of encouragement before a tough shift. But the nights were when they found each other most. One evening, after another long shift, Ethan found Amelia sitting on a bench outside the hospital, staring up at the night sky. "You okay?" he asked, slipping his hands into the pockets of his coat. She gave a small smile. "Just thinking." "About what?" She exhaled. "About how easy it is to lose yourself in this job. To forget that there's a world outside these walls." He hesitated, then sat beside her. "You make it feel different." She turned to him, surprised. "You make this job feel less mechanical," he admitted. "Less like something I have to do and more like something I want to be better at." Amelia reached for his hand then, her fingers lacing through his. "And you make me feel like I'm not carrying the weight of the world alone." The kiss that followed was inevitable. It was slow, filled with the unspoken words they had both been afraid to say. It was a promise, a beginning. Their love wasn't easy. The hospital had a way of testing even the strongest relationships. There were nights when exhaustion made them snap at each other, moments when the weight of loss felt too heavy to bear. But through it all, they held on. Because in the middle of the chaos, in the place where life and death constantly collided, they had found something worth fighting for. And neither of them was willing to let it go.